My sister stole our dying father's life savings and then showed up to his funeral in a brand new SUV. I-37F never thought I'd be sharing something like this, but I need to get it off my chest, and honestly, I don't know where else to turn. My relationship with my sister, 42F, has always been complicated, but what she did crosses boundaries I didn't even know existed in family relationships. For context, our dad was diagnosed with stage 4 pancreatic cancer 14 months ago. The prognosis was grim from the start, maybe 6 to 9 months with aggressive treatment. Dad was always the rock of our family after Mom passed away 10 years ago. He never remarried, just devoted himself to being there for us and later his grandchildren. He was that kind of dad, who never missed a school play or sports game, who taught us to change our own oil and insisted we understand basic finances. He built his whole life around his family. When we got the diagnosis, I immediately took family leave from my job as a high school counselor. I'm single with no kids, so it made sense for me to be his primary caregiver. My sister Diane has 3 kids, 14, 11, and 8, and works as a regional sales manager, so everyone understood she couldn't drop everything. At least that's what I told myself at the beginning. What was supposed to be 6 to 9 months stretched into a full year. I eventually had to resign from my position entirely when my leave ran out. Dad wanted to stay in his own home rather than a facility, so I moved into his guest room to provide round-the-clock care. The cancer was brutal. Watching someone you love waste away, seeing them in constant pain despite medication, helping them with the most basic and intimate tasks when they've always been so independent and strong. It changes you. Throughout this entire time, Diane visited exactly twice. The first time was right after diagnosis, where she stayed for about an hour and spent most of it on her phone in the kitchen. The second time was 3 months before he passed, when she brought the kids for a brief Sunday visit. Dad rallied for that visit, sitting up in his recliner and putting on a brave face so the kids wouldn't be scared. He even joked and told stories, though I could see how much it cost him. When the kids went outside to play in the backyard, I overheard Diane telling Dad that work was absolutely insane right now, and that her oldest was having some behavioral issues at school that required her constant attention. Dad just nodded and told her he understood completely, that her children needed to come first, and that he was so proud of how she juggled everything. He never once made her feel guilty. After they left, he cried. It was the only time during his entire illness that I saw him break down. "They're not coming back, are they?" he asked me. I didn't know what to say. I called Diane weekly with updates. I sent pictures. I arranged video calls when Dad was feeling up to it. I practically begged her to come visit, especially as things got worse. There was always an excuse. A work emergency, a child's recital, a migraine, a scheduling conflict. I stopped pushing eventually because it just upset Dad to see me frustrated. 2 days before he passed, Dad was drifting in and out of consciousness. The hospice nurse had increased his morphine, and we both knew the end was close. I'd been sleeping in short bursts in the chair beside his bed, afraid to leave him alone, for even a moment. That particular morning, the hospice nurse convinced me to take a shower and change clothes while she sat with him. That's when Diane made her move. Apparently, she drove to Dad's bank with a power of attorney document he had signed 3 years earlier when he had a routine surgery. It was intended to be temporary and honestly should have been updated or revoked. But with everything happening so fast with his diagnosis, it just never came up. She withdrew $127,000 from his accounts, everything he had, his checking account, savings account, and even cashed out a CD that wasn't yet mature, paying the penalty. Dad passed away peacefully 2 days later, with me holding his hand. I was devastated, but also relieved that his suffering was over. I called Diane immediately, and she seemed appropriately upset, saying she'd help with the funeral arrangements and would be over the next day. When I went to the funeral home to begin making arrangements, I wrote a check from Dad's account for the deposit. The funeral director called me 2 hours later to awkwardly inform me that the check had bounced. Confused, I called the bank, only to discover the accounts had been emptied. The bank manager gently explained that Diane had come in and withdrawn everything, showing me the transaction records. I felt like I'd been punched in the stomach. I immediately called Diane, who didn't answer. I drove to her house, still wearing the same clothes I'd been in for 2 days, probably looking half crazy, and confronted her in her driveway. That's when I saw it. A brand new Lincoln Navigator SUV parked in front of her garage. "What the hell's going on?" I demanded. "Dad's accounts are empty and I can't even pay for his funeral." She had the audacity to look annoyed, like I was interrupting her day. "Dad promised that money to me," she said coolly. "He knew I needed it for the kids' college funds and to get a reliable vehicle. We discussed it months ago." I was stunned. Why would he promise you everything and not leave anything for funeral expenses? Why wouldn't he mention this to me when I was with him every single day? "He probably didn't want to upset you," she said with a shrug. "He knew you'd be emotional about it. Besides, you're single with a good job. I have 3 kids to support." "I quit my job to take care of him," I practically shouted. "I haven't had an income in months. I've been using my savings to supplement his expenses." "That was your choice," she replied. "Nobody asked you to do that. You've always been dramatic about everything." It got worse from there. She accused me of trying to manipulate Dad in his final months, suggested I was after his money myself, and even implied that I enjoyed playing martyr by caring for him. When I mentioned getting a lawyer, she laughed and said, "Good luck with that. The POA was legal, and Dad's wishes were clear to me." I had to put the funeral expenses on my credit card. I was too exhausted and grief-stricken to fight about it right then. The funeral itself was another level of surreal. Diane showed up in designer clothes with a full face of professional makeup, her hair freshly highlighted, dripping in jewelry I'd never seen before. She parked that brand new SUV right in front of the funeral home where everyone could see it. During the service, she got up to give a eulogy that made me question my own reality. She talked about their special bond and how she'd been by his side through every step of his illness. She shared anecdotes about conversations that never happened and moments she was never present for. I sat there, still exhausted from months of caregiving, wearing a simple black dress I'd had for years, listening to her rewrite history while our relatives nodded and wiped away tears. Afterward, at least 5 relatives approached me separately to hand Diane their condolence cards, each saying some variation of, "We know how hard you've worked taking care of your father." They thought she was the one who had been the caregiver. I was too shocked to correct them in that moment. The final straw came as we were leaving. Diane pulled me aside and asked, "By the way, can you keep paying Dad's cell phone bill for a few months? Sometimes I just want to call and hear his voicemail greeting when I miss him." The same cell phone I'd been holding to his ear during those final months so she could speak to him when she was too busy to visit. I filed a lawsuit the following week. I'm not a confrontational person by nature, but this wasn't just about the money. It was about honoring Dad's true wishes and not letting her desecrate his memory with lies. The legal battle dragged on for 18 excruciating months. Because she had a technically valid POA, her actions weren't criminal, but I was able to challenge them as a breach of fiduciary duty. I had documentation of everything: Dad's actual funeral plans he'd written out years earlier, text messages where she acknowledged he wanted proper funeral arrangements, bank statements showing the suspicious timing of the withdrawals, testimonials from the hospice workers about her absence, and even statements from Dad's friends about his intentions for his modest estate. Our extended family split into factions. My aunt, Dad's sister, and 2 cousins stood firmly with me, having witnessed my caregiving firsthand. Others believed Diane's elaborate stories or felt that fighting about money dishonors your father's memory. Some suggested I should be the bigger person and let her keep the money for the sake of the children, as if my financial security and the actual promises my father made were worthless. The judge ultimately ruled entirely in my favor. Not only did Diane have to return the entire $127,000, but she was also responsible for my legal fees, which had climbed to over $30,000, and additional damages for the emotional distress and financial hardship her actions caused. The ruling specifically cited her unconscionable abuse of a position of trust during a time of family crisis. Several family members who had initially taken her side reached out to apologize after seeing the evidence presented in court. My cousin Jennifer admitted, "I had no idea she'd visited him so rarely. The way she talked, it sounded like she was there every weekend." Diane, unsurprisingly, has maintained her innocence. She's now telling extended family and mutual friends that I manipulated the legal system and stole her children's inheritance out of jealousy. She even tried to claim in court that she'd been Dad's caregiver on weekends and evenings when no one was around to witness it, a claim easily disproven by the hospice care logs and my neighbors' testimonies. The money has been returned, and I've used it to pay off the funeral expenses and the credit card debt I accumulated during those months of unemployment. I've established a small college fund for each of her children, which they'll receive when they turn 18, something I know Dad would have wanted despite everything. I've donated a portion to the hospice organization that helped us, and I'm using the rest to rebuild my life and career. We haven't spoken since the court case concluded 6 months ago. At family gatherings, we maintain a cold civility for everyone else's sake. She still drives that Navigator, though I notice the designer handbags have disappeared. Some relatives still tell me I should forgive her, because she's family. But I can't help thinking that's exactly why her betrayal cuts so deep. She wasn't just some stranger who took advantage. She was the one person who should have stood beside me during the hardest experience of our lives. Dad taught us both better than this. I just wish she'd been listening.